Welcome to My Comic Shop History. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. Premiere Week continues with this comic creator special recorded live at Aw Yeah Comics. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to participate in an event co-sponsored by Aw Yeah and the Westport Public Library. I moderated a pair of conversations featuring Cliff Chiang and Michael Kingston about their careers and creative process. I enjoyed both chats immensely, and I hope you do too. My thanks to Westport and Aw Yeah for including me. Enjoy! So our first creator began his comic book career as an assistant editor before transitioning to a freelance artist. Today, you've seen his work in the pages of Green Arrow, Black Canary, Wonder Woman, and a lot more. Currently, he is the artist and co-creator of the Image Comics series Paper Girls. He's here today to talk about his creative process and his career. Once again, let's give a warm welcome to Cliff Chiang. So now, Cliff, normally on my show, I start by asking my guests about their comic shop history. But I know already that for you, your brother basically brought the comic shop to you, right? He would bring comics home.
Yeah, I guess this was, 1984 or so. And my older brother started bringing them home. I always knew about comics, but hadn't read them. They just weren't around the house. And I just fell in love with it. Just the kinds of stories, seeing, the drawings and the sense of a much bigger story outside of that particular issue really just kind of sucks you in when you're that age. Just your imagination runs wild with it.
Now, did he actively seek to introduce you to comics, or was it more that he left them laying around and you grabbed them?
No, he was getting into them too at the same time. So it really was a journey for all of us, to just get into it and discover this new world. And, this was before really there were a lot of specialty stores. So our way of finding comics was going to, 7-Elevens and, five and dime stores and just trying to find issues, and occasionally you'd find it. You never knew when they were going to show up. We weren't smart enough to ask when new comics would be coming in, so we just have to show up and hope that the next issue of X-Men or Fantastic Four was there, and and maybe they had something that hadn't sold for a month or two, and so we could kind of backtrack. I remember very clearly. I grew up in Jersey, and we were going to Florida for vacation that summer, and my dad had this great idea of driving down, and we made them stop at like just about any rush stop that there was. Like if there was a 7-Eleven or a gas station or something like that, we'd go and just to check out the comic rack, to see if there was something that we could patch the holes in our collection. And it wasn't even really a collection. It was just trying to figure out what the story was. So I'm sure at that point my parents were regretting that the comics in the house.
Well, it's funny today. I feel like you don't have as much of an opportunity for a quest like that these days, because it's so easy to track down what you might be missing, which is great in its own way. But there is something to be said for that kind of experience.
The modern thing now is just that you're just inundated with with choices. So you can find everything. You can read 40 years of comics if you want to, but where do you start? And what is do you necessarily want to start at the beginning? Like I don't I love comics, but I never started at the beginning with any of it really. And then it's just kind of finding things that you like, and then maybe going back and learning about the history of them.
Right. Now, when you started drawing, what were the first things that you drew? Were you drawing actual sequential pages, telling stories? Was it more pinup stuff?
Wow, I don't know. I'd be surprised if anybody started drawing sequential pages.
That'd be pretty advanced, but you're extremely talented, so I wouldn't put it past you.
No, I think a lot of kids just want to copy like the cool drawings that they see, and it starts there, trying to figure out what is cool about it. I think maybe that was always my creatively, like there's always part of me that wanted to kind of reverse engineer things, maybe not always consciously, and certainly later when I wanted to be a professional, but early on just trying to see like, well, what is it about this style? Like, why do I like this drawing? And what are the things that make it look like the artist drew it as opposed to, my hacky version of it?
Right. So as Alex mentioned, a little bit later, you'll be doing portfolio reviews. Mm-hmm. So this is jumping ahead a little bit, but what are the types of things that you typically find when you do portfolio reviews? What are some pitfalls that aspiring artists sometimes fall into that maybe they should keep in mind?
I mean, I definitely see a certain kind of drawing pretty often when I do portfolio reviews. And that is usually just a matter of like just putting in hours and learning more about figure drawing and that sort of thing. So the fact that I see like that level of drawing pretty often, like, isn't surprising. What does surprise me when I see portfolios is when people are really thinking about storytelling, and they're really trying to think about it not as there's a level of thought to it beyond just, say, imitating what they might have seen in a comic already, but that they're thinking broader about how to tell a story, what the reader needs, what kind of information they can get across in each panel. One of the things I always think of when doing portfolio reviews is how difficult it is your page is so limiting in a lot of ways, and that's the challenge, is like you're always fighting against real estate. It's like, because you could tell a story, with just single page images if you wanted to, but when you have to break that down to someone, entering a room in a building and that sort of thing, it's like, how do you parse that information out so that the reader can understand it and is interesting to them?
Right. So this is the Write Your Graphic Novel series. So we do have some aspiring creators here.
Great.
And it's always interesting to me to talk to people about breaking into the industry, because there are different paths, and it can be a challenging thing to do. So that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to talk to you. The other is just that I'm a big fan of your work. But for you, I know you started again on the editorial side, and then you made that transition. It's always fascinating to me to talk to people who have worn multiple hats in the industry, because I feel like it just gives you a more well-rounded perspective than you would have if you had just been an editor or just been an artist. However, before we get to that, I learned recently that you were, before you got your job in editorial, you were admitted to law school, and you deferred for 2 years. What was the reason that you gave when you requested that deferral?
All right, maybe I should go back a little bit. I had gotten back into comics when I was in college. I hadn't read them like throughout probably most of high school, I think. And going to college, I finally had like kind of less assigned time, and then maybe a little bit of, pocket money from like a school, work study job. And there were a lot of great comic stores in town. So I would go and discovered all the Vertigo stuff, which was really hitting me at the right age as an English major. Reading Sandman just kind of blows your mind. You're like, wow, I had no idea that there were comics like this, and that there were comics, out there for me. I'd gotten tired of reading a lot of superhero stuff, and this stuff really I found it at the right time. It made me want to pursue a career in comics and draw them, hopefully. There was a time where I wanted to be a filmmaker as well, but then just kind of taking those classes and struggling with the equipment and realizing how much like kind of a group effort it was. I enjoyed the idea of maybe doing all of it myself, and I could do that with a comic book. I could tell a story. I'd, be responsible for the acting and the cinematography and the lighting and, and that sort of thing. So it felt to me like almost a pure expression of, whatever storytelling motive I had. Comics is such a small industry. When I got out, I was just basically looking for whatever job I could get, knowing that it wasn't going to be easy. My backup plan was law school. So in like the last couple of years of college, I prepared for that, taking the LSAT and getting my applications out. And it was really pretty half-hearted, but a fallback plan, like, nonetheless, and I needed it because I didn't know what would be waiting for me outside after I graduated. luckily I did get into law school, so I knew that there was like something there for me. And but then when I got out, started working, I deferred. I forget exactly how it happened, but like I got in and then managed to. I paid my deposit to start in the fall, and then right before it happened, I've gotten work with Heidi McDonald at Disney Adventures magazine, and
Heidi, people might be familiar with her. She runs Comics Beat, the comics news site.
yeah, and she was working at Disney Adventures magazine. We were editing about 20 pages of comics on a monthly basis. A lot of it from cartoons and movies that they were working on at the time. And then at that was right when she brought Bone, Jeff Smith's Bone, to Disney Adventures, and that I know like really opened up readership for Bone like in a really amazing way. I think, yeah, I told NYU that I was going to take some time off. I didn't want to go right into law school. I wanted some work experience and possibly do some traveling to Taiwan, where my parents are from, and then I was going to go there, maybe teach English and that sort of thing. All of it was pure BS. But really, like, that's a bulletproof excuse. You're going to tell someone that you're going to really explore your heritage. I feel terrible about it now, but I knew that would probably go over. But it gave me a 2-year timeline to figure out where I was going to be in comics. And after working with Heidi for about almost a year, that's when a job opened up at Vertigo, and then started doing editorial there.
Well, I bring that up because I did go to law school, and now I work in the admissions office of that law school.
Okay.
And the next time I get a deferral request, I am going to investigate it very thoroughly.
Yeah, you got to poke around a little bit more.
You just got to make sure. That's right. So it was the idea from the start, get the job in editorial, take that time to learn how comics are made and hone your craft and network. I mean, was that the idea from the start, and then you would make the transition to full-on artist?
That was, I guess, the conservative path. I wanted to draw comics. I wanted to do all that stuff. My inspiration at that point was, Mike Allred and Frank Miller and this vanguard of people who were, doing stuff on their own. It also was very, like in film, there's that DIY, Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez. You really felt like, if you had enough, if you really wanted it, and that there was a way to figure it out and then do it on your own terms. But drawing comics is really, especially then, it can be a rigid thing where, you really do need to learn the ropes. My stuff wasn't good enough, but, in your head, you tell yourself that you are, even though you have your own insecurities. And, if I'd been able to get a job penciling comics right out, I would have done that. But it just wasn't possible. So, I wanted to be involved with comics. I didn't know if a drawing career would be possible, so I wanted to, just be involved any way that I could, and editorial seemed like an easier path in some ways to try and chart because, with an English lit and art degree, that it somehow made sense, and luckily I was able to find work.
Easier, yes, probably relatively easier,
Yeah.
but it's still funny to me because it's, again, as we've said, the comics industry is a relatively small one, so I feel like getting any job in there is not necessarily an easy thing. So you got one kind of hard to get job in order to get an even harder to get job. When you started there, I mean, were your editors at DC in particular, were they aware of your creative aspirations?
Yeah, I did, put some samples out there early on, but knowing that, no one really wants to see your bad samples, and no one wants to be, you don't want to be walking down the hall and someone catching you and being like, oh, that guy, So I was pretty gentle about, approaching people and tried to always show my best work. And, you want to be a person, to them. You don't want to just be someone who's hustling. And so it was there. I worked on art at night, but during the day, 9 to 5 or 10 to 7, as it usually was, it was comics editorial was like grad school for me because part of your job as an assistant editor is to catalog the art as it comes in. It comes up from the FedEx room. You got to see which book it belongs to. You got to make copies of it. If it's pencils, you have to take a red marker to the copies and put the balloons in, and that gets sent off to the letterer. And so you're very hands-on with every stage of production, and you get to feel how changes from the script ripple. If a penciler changes the storytelling, you want to check against that. You want to see how it changes the pacing and where you put balloons. And then at the same time, you're also making sure once it's inked that gets out to the colorist. So it really taught me a lot about how the industry works. It taught me a lot. I got to see how a lot of different professionals worked, some of the ones that were like always on time, what were their schedules like, the ones who were late but really awesome, so you would always forgive them, and then the ones who were late and not so good, and how they would lie or through their teeth to stay in your good graces. It was pretty multifaceted, but I learned a lot about the industry. I learned a lot about being a professional, as well as just gaining contacts for later. I stayed there for about 2 years when they kind of shuffled the editorial staff around a little bit, and I decided if I was going to, I had to decide whether I wanted to stay or not. And I think staying would have meant I didn't see an upward path for me necessarily, because it's a small industry, because people move up sort of by attrition. Someone moves to another department or someone leaves. I didn't necessarily see a promotion coming anytime soon. And I thought really hard about whether this is something that I wanted to be doing, or whether I should take the chance and try and, go freelance. And, luckily I'd had a couple small jobs at DC that it kind of, just gave me a little bit more confidence. And then decided to go freelance. And again, hedging my bets, I also knew I wasn't going to have a lot of work, so I ended up moving home with my mom for a couple of years, which is really tough when you're 25. But I'm really grateful for her, and it allowed me to kind of be creatively open to a lot of things without having to just accept gigs based on making rent. And that sort of thing. So security wasn't, the primary goal. It was just finding the jobs that were right for me. I never had a very mainstream style, so to speak. I think, even though I wanted to draw superheroes, I also really loved creator-owned Vertigo stuff and Dark Horse and all the different weird books that were coming out. And I always kind of fit uncomfortably in the superhero universe, and had to find a way to make it work for me. And so I knew I wasn't going to be getting a ton of jobs. They just had to be the right ones. And then if I got the right one and did my best, then maybe someone would take notice of it.
Well, I mean, that's a big decision to walk away from your day job. I imagine, I long for the day when I can stroll into the law school admissions office and give my notice. And I suspect maybe for other aspiring creators out there, that's something that they grapple with as well. I mean, in your position, it probably was difficult because you are working a full-time job. So you didn't have as much time to be drawing, but at the same time, giving up that steady paycheck.
Yeah.
So definitely a big decision, but certainly one that paid off for you. So going back to having that well-rounded perspective and having seen so much, and I'm sure that was extremely educational, it's funny. So my wife and I were at that stage in our lives where a lot of our friends are getting married. So over the 5 years we've been together, we've gone to a lot of weddings. And before our own wedding, when we would get an invitation, we were pretty good about getting the response card in, pretty good. Sometimes we drag our feet a little bit. But after our own wedding and waiting for people to send in their response cards, now, we're great. We get one, we get it out right away because we know what it's like to be in that position.
Yeah.
So are there any specific things from your experience as an editor that you try to keep in mind now that you're on the other side and you're dealing with editors? Any things to make their lives easier?
Yeah,
I
think that is a big part of it. You can always, if you know the process, you know where you are in the assembly line. It's easier for you to anticipate what an editor might need, things that make their job easier. The one thing everybody can do is really just communicate. Editors get very nervous when they call and they have to leave messages and they don't get a call back, So, and yet at the same time, you can send in pages and not hear from them right away, and and then you're sitting there wondering about it. So, it goes both ways. But yeah, you have to be you just don't want them worrying about you. It's almost like they're like your, they're responsible for you, like they're a parent or something like that. You just check in with them.
Right.
And that's the easiest thing to do. And if you're running late or if you're having problems with things, like that's also, there might be things that they can do to help out, but I imagine people are also worried about, maybe losing pages because you're behind and they just farm them out to somebody else. And, and that's a fear too. You kind of have to balance your needs. But it's generally easier to just, make sure that nobody is stressed out.
Right. So once you finally started getting regular gigs, and I remember one of your earliest runs, those Josie Mack backups in Detective Comics with Judd Winnick, the psychic detective in the Gotham City Police Department. So how did you land those earliest gigs? And at that point, like now that you're really stepping up, was there more excitement, more trepidation, a little bit of both? How did you feel at that point?
That was a big deal for me. I mean, I had done a couple things here and there, but nothing was really very regular. A lot of it would be kind of one-shots that, would be really fun and would have a nice long lead time as well. But then working on Josie Mack was great because it was really manageable. It was maybe 8 pages a month, and it was like the shallow end of the pool, you had to get it done, but you had 3-4 weeks, to do it. It taught me a lot about, just making sure that, you were dependable, and if you were dependable, then people would come back to you for more work, as well as just, I had a lot of trust with my editors. Matt Idelson was editing that, and I knew him from being in the office. I'd helped out editorially in their office after I left, kind of just going back as a freelance editor for like a week or two. So we knew each other really well, and he trusted me, and there was even points where I kind of edited the script slightly, which was easy to do because I was drawing the book. I could just be like, well, let's move that line here, or let's approach this scene slightly differently. But it was fun, and for me, I do so much learning, like on the page. Like fake it till you make it kind of stuff, where it's like you just do it, and then if it doesn't work out, then you'll do better next time, but there's not necessarily a lot of time to do preparatory work and that sort of thing. So it was actually a good book for me to be on because so much of it was based in reality. It was Josie Mack, working at the precinct. I could research what precincts look like, and and a lot of real life stuff, and then occasionally Batman would show up, So those moments would then be even cooler because you'd gotten so used to the everyday nature of her job.
Right. So I'd like to turn to some of the runs that you're probably most known for. Obviously, you would go on to work with Judd Winnick again on Green Arrow, Black Canary. You had a tremendous run on Wonder Woman during the New 52 with Brian Azzarello, and of course now you're doing Paper Girls with Brian K. Vaughan. So I'm sure in each case, the collaborations are slightly different. I mean, how have each of those been? What made each of those distinct?
I think you get used to. I think once you do this for a while. And what's important if you're starting out, too, is to really think about the way you tell your comics. Like each of those writers has a different style, a very distinct style, and a lot of that comes down to pacing and dialogue and like what do you want the speed to be of like a person responding to somebody else? How do you want the reader to be reading your stuff? Do you want them to be reading it fast and kind of just breezing through it, or do you want them to slow down and take it, panel by panel? Each of them is a lot. I would say most of the writers that I've worked with, I've been really lucky that they've been really good, and the most successful ones have a good idea visually. They might not draw, but they have an idea of what makes a comic work and how much what goes in a panel. So if you read a script by Warren Ellis or Garth Ennis, or Brian K. Vaughan, Brian Azzarello, for example, like they know each panel's a moment. It's not, a scene from a movie. It's, you can't really think of it as an action that's happening. What you're doing is kind of just distilling the story down to one particular emotional moment, that may or may not have dialogue, and then stringing those together in a way that makes it feel like it's happening. But if you think about each of those moments and how they build to make a page, that's really helpful. I think that you can't. The worst scripts that I've had to do are the ones that don't take that into account, and they ask for a million different things in each panel, and you don't feel a progression from the first panel to the last. There's no like driving engine. There's no movement to it that narratively brings you from point A to point B.
In a case like that, how would you handle that? How would you respond? Would you try to talk with the writer, with the editor, just see what you could do on the art side?
There's really not a lot that you can do. And that's why writing is important. You want to make sure that the writer is writing comics and not just adapting, a screenplay that they have, because it's a different medium, and there are reasons why things work in comics that are separate from just taking, a teleplay and just breaking it down into moments,
With your Wonder Woman run in particular, the New 52 in general was a bit controversial, but your run in particular is often highlighted, as one of the bright spots of the New 52. And I know you've said one of the things that you're most proud of about that run is that the stories might have been dark, but Diana herself wasn't. And I think that's very true, and I think there's a lot of potential for other similar types of stories with other iconic characters. Like for years, I've longed to see the Superman version of Gotham Central, Daily Planet, where it's like Lois and Clark as Woodward and Bernstein, and Superman barely appears, and if he does, it's just a blur. Like something like that. Are there other things on your wish list, things that you think would work in that type of vein?
That's a good idea. No, that's a really good idea. I was thinking about something similar, kind of on the train right up here. I think after working on Wonder Woman for 3, 4 years, I think what I realize is that I don't necessarily enjoy the everyday kind of punch up kind of comic. Like I love what superheroes represent. I love the design. I love the mythology of it. But the stories that I like the best have always kind of looked at the genre from the side, like so something like Gotham Central or Batman Year One, or like treating, Daredevil, like, thinking about it as a crime comic, and not as a straight on, punch out the bad guy kind of thing, because it gives more life to it. It gives a context for it that makes, the super heroic stuff seem even larger, even bigger and more exciting. So I think, if there's any superhero stuff that I do, it's going to have a perspective like that on it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of versatility to these characters that isn't always necessarily tapped into, and it's there.
Yeah.
In terms of selecting projects, one thing I want to talk about is creator-owned versus, working for DC, but just generally speaking, in terms of taking on a project, writers often can do multiple books per month, but typically an artist, you're working on one series at a time. I liken it somewhat to, being a TV actor. You sign on for a TV show, you could be locked up for 5 years. So, as you're selecting which projects you're going to commit to and spend a year or more on, what are the factors that are going into that decision to take on something?
It's tricky. I wouldn't say that I've, figured it out in any way. I've been lucky that I've enjoyed, working with my collaborators so much. But, there's definitely a period where, like, you have what's offered, and you kind of have to weigh, is this a real offer, or is this just like something that they need you to plug a hole in the schedule? and often you don't know, or you might not have the freedom to make that choice either, because you just need to, you need to work. I've found that the projects I've been happiest with are the ones that get me really excited, and because occasionally I'll read a pitch and it'll sound really cool, but there's part of me that's a little scared of it, like because of something that it might be something that I haven't done before, but I need to figure out what that scared part is. Is it just because it's new to me, or is it because there's something kind of fundamentally like a bad fit for the project, So something like Paper Girls, I had, there was something I had some butterflies around it because, I hadn't really drawn kids. And the idea of drawing a book that was centered around 4 12-year-old girls was like, that was new to me, but it was exciting. And I knew that was something that, for whatever my unfamiliarity with it would be, I could get past it. And there was so much other stuff that was, that I really loved about it too, that it wasn't something, that would stop me from doing it, really. And in a way it was a challenge because, if I hadn't done that before, now was the time to do it. Other times it's just like, well, maybe that's not the greatest idea, or there's something about the execution that is going to be, or something about the project that would mean I wouldn't be able to do my best work. So the projects that I've had the most success with professionally, creatively, have been the ones that I find myself the most attached to, like that I believe in them in a certain way, and that there's something in me that tells me I have to do them, whether or not I'm scared.
Right. Well, going back to the Wonder Woman run, you guys were on that book for a relatively long time. I mean, I feel like we don't see long runs so much anymore. I mean, obviously there are exceptions to that, but I don't feel like you see that as much. I mean, for you, do you like spending years on a book? Do you prefer more like get in and out and move on to the next thing?
It depends. If something's working, you stick with it because you do need a certain amount of work. I think it's great to have a larger body of work, and we were really lucky with Wonder Woman to have such a great team. I was maybe the artist that did the most issues on that, but we also had Tony Akins and Goran Sujica and ACO on it. Among people that I can think of right now, and so it felt cohesive, because we all had the same goal of telling the best story that we could and keeping it all within our Wonder Woman universe. So if you jump from project to project, it's fun, but there's a lot of time that you spend kind of getting familiar with the world and figuring out what the project needs, and the familiarity that you feel when you're working on issue 12, you can't really beat that, because creatively it means that you can try different things. You've gotten used to doing things a certain way, and then you want to mix it up, and then whereas if you're just doing new stuff all the time, that can also lead to you maybe making compromises, about things, because you just need to get it done, and it's hard, and it's because it's difficult. And once you're further into a project, there's more nuance to it, and there's more opportunity to try something else.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And as far as the whole, DC Marvel versus creator owned, and this is a question that might speak to some of the aspiring creators in the audience here in terms of, what goals maybe they should be pursuing. I mean, with the DC Marvel characters, obviously, it's a chance to work on these iconic characters, kind of get your hands on that, be a part of their grand history and tradition. But again, you don't own the characters, and ultimately you are serving the needs of somebody else, a corporate entity, as opposed to something creator-owned where you guys have that creative freedom and you own it. So if it gets adapted, all of a sudden it's just a whole world that's opened up to you. So, and obviously you've done both. Is that something you recommend an aspiring creator, like strive to have experiences with each?
Yeah, it's tough. I can only say that, like, for myself, I really loved the superhero comics I read as a kid, and even though I haven't done a lot of them, I feel that I'm always asked, if there's one character you could draw, like, who would it be? And earlier in my career, I would have an answer for that. Now I don't. because it's all about the story. I've drawn enough like kind of stories that I don't love, featuring characters that I do love, and so when that happens, it really, the honeymoon's over. As far as the romance of superheroes, it's sort of like, well, if you have to draw, say, like a really boring Batman script, you're like, well, then you realize then that it's really about the story, and when you can, and your love of a character can only take you so far when it's a job that takes 10 hours at the drafting table a day, like that really becomes a slog if you don't love the story that you're telling. But I also really loved creator-owned books and the freedom those creators had to tell the stories that they wanted. So that was always a goal of mine, but it wasn't until Paper Girls that I was actually able to do a book like that, because I was trying to figure out my way within DC, and what my career would be. I don't know. I think something like Wonder Woman afforded me the chance, the ability to take a chance on Paper Girls. Although that sounds ridiculous, taking a chance on a Brian Vaughan project, but it gave me the freedom to go and do something, and the desire to do something that was completely different from superheroes.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about, because I feel like oftentimes in terms of the life cycle of a creator's career, what you often see is, getting their foot in the door with something, maybe at a smaller indie publisher, just to get their name out there, build up a body of work, catch the attention of somebody at DC or Marvel, get a superhero gig, build up their following, and then be able to go and do something creator-owned. Mm-hmm. Right? Is that fair to say in at least some cases?
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. I think when you're doing, as far as advice goes, if you're working for a publisher, you want to make sure that the work you're doing is that it's a two-way street, that it's something that they're asking for, but it's also something that creatively fulfills you, that it addresses something, and that you are getting something out of it other than just a paycheck, So if you can figure out a way, to put as much of yourself into anything as you can, and this way you always feel invested in it, and then so it's not this kind of soulless work. Even with Wonder Woman, what was great was that they really left us alone. Brian and I would just be talking a lot about the kinds of stories that we wanted to do in the book, and he was able to negotiate fairly early on that there wouldn't be crossovers with anything. Like, it just didn't make any sense for the story that we were telling for it to suddenly be to have Superman show up. So it gave us a lot of freedom, and it felt like, for the time that we were doing it, it felt like, it was our character, it was our take at the very least.
Yeah, and those are often the runs of mine as a reader that are favorites of mine, where you feel like the creators do have that freedom and have that ownership, even if it's for however long it is, but they can really put their stamp on it.
Yeah.
I want to shift and get into Paper Girls. Who here reads Paper Girls? Yeah, we got a lot of Paper Girls fans. Excellent. It's terrific. For anyone who's not familiar with it, it focuses on 4 preteen girls, Paper Girls, the morning after Halloween in 1988, suburban Ohio. They're delivering papers. Weird stuff starts happening. It's really terrific. It's funny to me, though, because I've seen numerous instances where it is likened to Stranger Things, and I'm curious from your perspective and Brian's as well, not that you need to speak for him, but I wonder, on the one hand, I suppose it's a good thing you have an easy point of reference for people, but at the same time, is there ever any frustration with your work being described and even defined in terms of something else? Because there are similarities, but they're their own stories.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. It is a really handy shorthand for describing the book, and there is maybe in terms of overall feel, a similarity there. But yeah, I think when you make the comparison, it does end up. It's probably only true really for the first volume, and then after that, the story changes pretty drastically. So, I'm grateful for the comparison, because they're comparing it to something that people really love, as opposed to something that they hate. And initially, I think I was maybe a little perturbed by it, because you always want to stand on your own 2 feet. But now that we're a few volumes into it, and our Paper Girls is its own thing. And if people want to describe it that way, that's cool with me.
As the co-creator on this, is the collaboration different? Is there more back and forth than you've had with previous writers?
I would say the back and forth is about the same, but what you do is you take, and this is to Brian Vaughan's credit, he's really open to collaboration. So what you do is you take creative ownership of it as well. Like, he's got an idea of where the story goes. He's kind of got things mapped out in his head that he hasn't told me about yet. But I also, will make suggestions to him that show up in later issues. And then when there's a scene and he asks for one thing, I can, it's up, if I'm not feeling it, it's up to me to say, like, well, what speaks to me? What do I think is cool? And these aren't marching orders, this is a point of departure. If you think there's something better to do, then draw that. Is something that he has in almost every script. Is like, this is how I saw it, but if you can think of it something cooler, then go do it. And that kind of forces you to think outside the box a little bit more. To say, well, I'm also a storyteller, so what do I want to do here? What do I feel is right for this comic moment?
Right. When you say there's things he hasn't divulged, is that because he's holding that close, or do you not want to know?
I think he's, in some ways, maybe mulling it over. In some ways, because it's a big surprise. He doesn't send me like an issue by issue breakdown of anything. I just get the script when I need to draw it. And we talk before each arc about where it's going, and in very general terms, maybe, but what's going to be in the script that I get, like, I'm never quite sure. So it's an experience for me reading it as the first time. I'm the first audience really for it, and which is always really exciting, because I think it's a good way. I wasn't used to that, but I think it is a good way to keep your artist engaged. But luckily, yeah, it's like I have a lot of trust in him, so it works out. There are other circumstances where I might want to be more involved with the plotting and that sort of thing, but that's a different creative relationship. But this has worked out really well. It's like, for me, with an editorial background, like, learning to back off in that way has been at first, it was not difficult, but like, it was a change of pace for me. And now that I'm, that we work this way, over 20 issues, it's pretty much second nature. And there's trust, and you're just telling each other, here's what I've done. I've put my best work into it. Now it's yours. Now you take it. It's really passing a baton on to the next creator. So he'll give it to me, and then I give it to to Matt Wilson and Jared Fletcher, the colorist and the letterer. So, like, everyone's doing their best, because there's a lot of trust involved, and that trust is there because everybody knows her. They can see that you're bringing your A game to it.
I suspect this is something you probably wouldn't be able to reveal, but has there been any interest in adapting Paper Girls for film or TV? And just generally speaking, is that something you would welcome?
Yeah, there has been a lot of interest. The thing is, especially when the book first came out, there was a lot of interest, and I said to Brian, I'm not sure even we know what this book is yet. Like, do we want to sell this property to someone who doesn't know at all? Where the story is going, and most importantly, what it's about, like, tonally, thematically. Like, those things are more revealed as the story goes on. It's not just the high concept, because, yeah, you could take the story in a bunch of different directions after that first volume. But now that we're deeper into it, it's hard to, it's sort of like, say, something like Scott Pilgrim, where it's like, or other series that I've seen where like they have to write an ending for the story before you've ended it yourself, and I think that's really difficult, and you don't want to creatively be put in that position. And I think anyone who does want to option it, they should know what the entire story is, right, and what they're buying necessarily, so essentially.
So as our time here starts to wind down, there are a couple other things that I want to get to, and I want to make sure we have time for at least a couple audience questions. Just in terms of your process, can you describe what your studio space is like? Are you, is it all digital? Are you still doing, drawing by hand? Not by hand, but physically? Mm-hmm. What's the process like?
Yeah, I mean, I live in Brooklyn, so it's difficult to work at home. You need a really fairly large space. So a bunch of years ago, some friends of mine who also work in comics and lived in the area, we started renting out a studio, which is a very unglamorous basement apartment. And it's, I've been there for a while now, and it's great. It's great to have a separate workspace from where you live. You don't always have work staring back at you, to be able to close the door on it, and also just know that when you're in that studio, you're there to work, and you're actually more productive because of it. Whereas if you're at home, there's always stuff to do. So you could be working, but then I got to get dinner started, or there's laundry that needs to be done, and there are things that are distracting. So you cut those out by going to a separate space. I mean, I know a guy who, lives in a house, and he literally walks out the front door and comes in the back to just get his head into a different space to know that he's going to work. And so the studio's been great. I have been working in a hybrid digital format since probably the early issues of Wonder Woman, where I pencil digitally. A lot of the planning work, a lot of the heavy lifting of penciling is, kind of making a lot of fixes, and being able to do that digitally where you can shift things and shrink them really easily without having to redraw them has actually made me a better draftsman. My stuff is more accurate now. I can see where there's problems and fix them easier. And then when that's fully penciled, I print it out onto Bristol board, and then I ink that by hand with pens and brushes and stuff like that, because there's something about the interaction, the Bob Ross happy accidents kind of stuff that, when you're drawing and then the pen catches a little bit, or makes a mark that you weren't expecting. For me, that brings a lot of life to the pages, and so I stay with that. And I like having, there's a way in which when you're done with a page, you can step back from it, which is always like a crucial thing when you're in art school, to kind of just like, you can be noodling on something like really right up close, but you really need to take a step back and look at it as a whole. And having a physical page, it's easier to do that versus just reducing the page on the screen. There's something about it that I think helps you kind of just judge the page, on its own, and see if it works. And then if anything needs to be changed, you can do that. And often, if I need to fix things, I'll do those digitally. But if it's minor, I can always just go in with whiteout,
right,
which is like, I use as much whiteout as I use ink, I think.
So my last question is actually a question from your biggest fan at Acme Comics in Greensboro, North Carolina, Justin. He wants to know, what is the thing you hope your readers will notice about your art? As in, I'm proud of this, or I took a chance on this visually, but will anyone notice?
In a way, what I'm proudest about my work is something that I think is in a lot of ways invisible. I don't, specifically with Paper Girls, we want to be as accessible as possible, but I don't think that means simple. What I really strive to do with Brian is create something that really is immersive, so that you start reading the book and nothing takes you out of it. Hopefully, like his dialogue is so smooth. There's never a bump there, So for me, it's making sure the same thing with the drawing, where nothing takes you out of the moment. And what can take you out of the moment is when the storytelling gets choppy, when you haven't visually explained something and it just shows up. When anything that maybe even subconsciously bumps in your head as you're reading it, because we just want the book to be easy to read, so that anybody could pick it up if it's their first book. They're not challenged by a really static grid where they're not sure whether to go up or down or left or right. That kind of thing. Just really make it very clear, but not boring. And I think that's something that doesn't necessarily draw a lot of attention to itself, because it's just about making it a smooth, easy ride.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much. Cliff Chiang.
Thank you.
All right, we will continue our conversation here. Our next guest is the writer and creator of HEADLOCKED, the story of a theater major who falls in love with wrestling and tries to make it as a professional wrestler. It's an authentic look into the life of professional wrestlers and the industry as a whole from a lifelong fan. Please join me in welcoming Michael Kingston. So, full disclosure, when Alex told me you were going to be part of this event, I wasn't entirely familiar with you and your work.
That's understandable.
No.
I'm not entirely familiar with myself either.
But honestly, I've really never followed wrestling in any way. But as I was learning about you and your book and reading your book, I was just so struck and inspired by your passion and the passion of the character. I mean, it's just right there on the page. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you. So I came across a number of interviews that you've given. You've recounted your origin story about growing up as a wrestling fan and a comic book fan, and finding that the wrestling comics that were out there weren't what you were looking for. What were they missing?
I think, when I was a kid, like I said, I've loved wrestling and comics since I was about 8 years old, and just every time there would be wrestling comics, I would go and buy them, but they were always like Undertaker fighting demons, or, Kevin Nash's Mad Max, or Ultimate Warrior stripping Santa Claus naked and stealing his suit. Some weird stuff, but it was never about wrestling. It was always wrestlers doing other things, which just never really had any allure to me. And some people like that stuff. It's never been my thing. So at some point it kind of occurred to me that no one was ever going to make the comic book that I wanted to read. So I decided to make it myself.
Right. So this is the Write Your Graphic Novel conference. So, once you made that decision, I'm gonna make my own comic. I mean, where did you start? Were there any, had you written anything before? Were there resources that you utilized? Any kind of training? How did you tackle that?
I made a lot of mistakes. I don't have any formal writing training. I have a biochemistry degree. I manage a warehouse full time, as a regular job. So I just, I guess I've always considered myself a storyteller. I come from a family of storytellers and bullshitters and whatever. So I just started from the beginning, I guess. It's tough because there's no real beaten path. So the first thing I did was what made sense to me, not, being a lifelong fan of comics, but not really understanding the industry. I made a pitch packet, this is what it's about, and this is where you can sell it. The whole plan has always been in my head. You would sell it to wrestling fans. And so I took it to every comic book publisher around, and they were, first they were like, well, where's your art? And I'm like, well, I'm a writer. Why would I need art? And they're like, well, you got to have art. Get an artist. I'm like, but you're a comic book company, and I'm some dude. How would that even work? So found an artist, and, we do the dance, but, no one was interested. People were not really cool. A dude, I always tell this story, but, there was a guy that straight laughed in my face. When I gave him the idea for my book, and it stings a little bit, obviously something that you're passionate about and somebody responds that way, and it's off the beaten path. I get it. You know what I mean? At the time, nobody was really doing straight drama in comics, and, it's all superheroes and stuff. Even as ridiculous and over the top as wrestling is apparently it wasn't, what they wanted. So, but I've always, I've been a part of both fan bases, and anytime I would go to wrestling shows, there would be people with comic book shirts, and anytime I would go to comic book shows, there would be people with wrestling shirts. So I knew it was there. I just had to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the crossover appeal, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because in both instances, you have larger-than-life characters, colorful costumes, good versus evil, so it makes sense. But it's funny, we were talking about this when you first got here. You know, growing up, I always felt a bit of a stigma as a comic book fan. I mean, my parents, teachers, like, people weren't exactly receptive to comic books. But I feel like you've had even a harder road as a wrestling fan and a comic book fan.
Yeah, no, when I was growing up, I was a double nerd. I mean, it was tough, but, you know, I mean, both of those things are a lot more accepted now than they were, but, you know, you like what you like and you do what you like, and you don't necessarily, I don't know. I guess I've never really worried too much about what people think of me, so I don't know, maybe that's for better or worse when it comes to my fashion sense, but...
Well, you know, on that note, and going back to the rejection that you faced, I mean, I'm a huge Rocky fan, and I see elements of that, you know, in your work, underdog story, and there's a great quote from Rocky Balboa that, you know, it doesn't matter how it looks to anyone else. All that matters is how it looks to you. And clearly you've had that passion, and you've been able to realize it with the comics and everything that you've built. So, you know, I mean, after receiving those rejections from traditional publishers and deciding to go your own way, really from a production standpoint, I mean, what were the next steps that you took? Was finding an artist step two?
Yeah, so I had found an artist. I had partnered up with some guys. It's called Visionary Comics Studio, and it was just a bunch of guys that were looking to break into comics. And I partnered up with them. And, you know, at the time they had a message board, and it was just people looking for artists looking for writers. And I found an artist. His name was Randy Valiente, and he was down to work on it. He wasn't really a wrestling fan, so it makes collaboration kind of difficult. You know, it's a lot of YouTube clips and whatnot, you know, as far as our first book goes. But, you know, we made it work. And from there, like, I met a letter on that message board, and we were able to put the book together. So, you know, and through that first process, then I kind of learned about, I guess, the production aspect of it.
Right. So how did you eventually have it just printed? I mean...
So the first series was done in floppy through Marcosia, which is a UK-based publisher. And it was interesting because, you know, in my head, you know, everybody kind of believes in what they do. So I'm like, you know, this thing's going to sell. It's going to fly off the shelves, you know, whatever. And so I took a week off from work, and I drove to every comic book store in 3 states. I went through Comic Shop Locator and put all the zip codes in. I wrote all the stores down, and I figured out like a MapQuest route to go from store to store to store. Like I spent one day in Manhattan, and I started at the tip and walked 100 blocks. And I had little preview books that I had made, and I talked to every comic shop owner, and they said every one of them knew multiple customers in their store that were wrestling fans. But a lot of them were like, yeah, but we don't carry indies. I'm not carrying, you know, we only carry top 50. I mean, I heard a lot of excuses and whatever. And it's just, that's when I sort of learned about the difficulties of publishing as an independent. You know, previews, the back of the book, and all of that stuff. And, you know, I mean, I had people that were, you know, when we were in previews, I had people reaching out to me and, like, I'm trying to get this book and I can't get this book from my store. You know, and I called a couple of shop owners, and I called one guy in particular, and, you know, and it's like, this guy's telling me that you told him that you can't get the book, and, like, this is the order code. And he goes, oh, yeah, we don't carry indies. I'm like, well, don't tell him you can't get it. Tell him you don't want to get it, which is an insane business model of turning down money from someone, but I get it, too. You know, I know that obviously comic book retail is a difficult proposition as well. So so I had all those things sort of working against me.
So the book was so you went through Diamond, and the book was in preview. So retailers could order it.
Correct.
Right.
I mean, you know, it didn't move. And I mean, despite all the legwork I had put in and all the effort I had put in and whatever, it didn't go anywhere. So
I think I might have read you even offered to have them sell it on consignment, and they
there was a guy in my town who I went to, and he just said, he goes, I don't think anybody's ever going to read this. And he wouldn't even carry it on consignment. And his clerk bought one from me right there out of my bag. Because I love wrestling. Because I buy one from you, and the guy still wouldn't put it on his shelf. So, I mean, that stuff sucks when you're going through it. I mean, now it's a good story, and it's, you know, it's fuel. You know, you don't ever forget that stuff when people kind of reject you in such a real personal manner. And I get it. It's not a personal manner, but it's hard not to take it personal either. I mean, there wasn't personal animosity on their part.
So, I mean, eventually, though, you were able to build up momentum and build up your fan base. I mean, you've attracted the attention and interest and collaboration of professional wrestlers. You've run multiple successful Kickstarter campaigns. So how did you get from those rejections from publishers and stores to where you are now? I know there's so much hustle that goes into this. Can you tell me about what you do?
Yeah. So initially, like, always being a wrestling fan or whatever, I was, active. This is the one thing I would tell anybody. Like, this is the most important thing. If you want to try to do your own thing in this day and age, and everybody's trying to do their own thing, you can't wait for your audience to come to you. You have to go find your audience. So I sold my book out of my backpack at wrestling shows. I put on a message board, like, this is where I'm sitting. If you want to come buy a book, this is where I'm at. I sold books that way to build an audience. I would set up at some wrestling shows. I would set up at Comic Cons and stuff. And then, it really kind of turned for me was, a lot of wrestlers they'd be at comic book shows as fans, and they would buy my book from me and then reach out to tell me how much they liked it. I met Hurricane this way, Rob Van Dam, Christopher Daniels, Frankie Kazarian, and a couple of fellas like that. And they really sort of helped me, also promoting it and stuff. But then the real sort of thing for me was I was able to get Jerry the King Lawler to do the covers to my comic books. So I sent him a cold email through his website. Like, I literally forgot I did it after I did it because it's such a ridiculous thing. Like, he's so famous and whatever, and people know him from, like, Man on the Moon and the David Letterman thing with Andy Kaufman and all of that. And at the time, he's the WWE commentator every week. So, I forgot I did it after I did it. And then maybe, like, 2 weeks later, I get an email, like, this is my address, send me some books. And I'm still like, it's his webmaster or something. And then maybe about 2 weeks after that, he calls me. And, it's his voice. You can't fake it. You know what I mean? He's like, yeah, I love comics, and I'd love to do this for you. And so, as it turns out, Jerry had got into wrestling through art as drawing. He used to draw wrestlers and send them into the Memphis television station, and one day they put him on air, and then they hired him as like almost like a courtroom reporter, where he would draw the events that happened on the non-televised shows, and then they would show them. And then through that, he ended up meeting wrestlers and got trained to become a wrestler. So he said, when he saw my email, this was sort of an opportunity for him to pay that kindness forward that somebody had, shown him years back. So that helped. I started doing shows with Jerry, and then it got me more cred with other wrestlers. It got me more cred with fans. And through then we took it to Kickstarter once it became a viable option.
Well, yeah, I'm sure the things that you found lacking in existing wrestling comics, other people did too, whether they're professional wrestlers or wrestling fans. So, and it's interesting too, because I came across this in one of your interviews. You were talking about, a similarity between the comics industry and the wrestling industry. People see superheroes and think that's all of comics. People see WWE and think that's all of wrestling. And clearly in both instances, there's so much more to it and so many more layers. And I think you've really tapped into that with Headlocked. So, what is it about Headlocked that you think is resonating with these people who share your passion?
I think everybody, to a certain extent, when you enjoy something, you kind of like to see behind the curtain.
Yep.
We do a little of that. It's also, like I said, it's a coming-of-age story. It's sort of an underdog story. And I think people always have a soft spot for that. And a lot of it, like, the physical part of it isn't necessarily things that I've gone through, but the emotional part of it is definitely the same thing that I've gone through, as a somebody trying to do their own thing. This kid's trying to, break into a business that doesn't have sort of a set path, and, he makes all the mistakes and whatnot. So, a lot of it sort of emotionally is, comes from right here. So I feel like that's, lots of people, I think more people have watched Rocky than have watched a boxing match. You know what I mean? So, like, to say it's a wrestling comic or whatever it is, but it's not. It's in the same way that Rocky is a boxing movie.
Right. Yeah, funny enough, I said at the top, I'm a big Rocky fan. I don't watch boxing. I've seen a match or two, but it's not something that I watch regularly. But it's that spirit of the underdog story. So, again, I mentioned before about, the hustle. Can you give us a rough idea? We just started 2018, 2017. How many wrestling and/or comic shows did you attend last year?
I really have no idea. So I work about 60 hours a week and manage a warehouse. I get emails all the time for work that I have to deal with. missing trucks, angry workers, or whatever. But I try to be somewhere every weekend. I was in Miami last weekend for a Comic-Con. I'm here this weekend. Tomorrow I'm in Poughkeepsie working on a story with a WWE guy for sort of a secret headlock story. I think next week I don't have anything yet, but I'm trying to avoid going to Philadelphia. But I'm going to Kansas City. Just in the first quarter, I got Kansas City, New Orleans, Washington, D.C., Anaheim. I've got some local signings. I've got some wrestling shows in New Jersey and Connecticut. So, you got to be out there. You got to make a connection with people one way or the other. I mean, there's so much. I mean, it's a comic book, but you're not just competing with comic books. You're competing for someone's time. And I mean, cat videos are awesome and they're free. You know what I mean? Like, I watch cat videos all the time. But you gotta compete with that. You gotta make somebody understand why what you're doing is worth their time. And it's, that's, I find the personal connection is really the best way to achieve that. I don't get it's different now. I mean, I've been doing it for a little while and I've got some big names attached and it's a little different. But I mean, initially, this was the first year for my fourth book where I sort of I've gotten support from the comic book media a little bit. But I mean, for a long time, it was just me shouting into the wind, I guess. And, some of my wrestling friends throwing me some retweets and, just putting feet to the pavement.
Yeah, I mean, that balance, that tension between your day job and daily responsibilities and the passion that you're trying to pursue. I mean, it's something I certainly identify with, and perhaps our aspiring creators here do as well. And I know striking that balance can be a difficult thing, but I found if you really have that passion, that can drive you and really carry you through a lot, whether it's rejection or waiting to hear back, which that can be its own beast.
I'm right there right now, actually.
Well, I saw that you submitted Headlocked to $7 Productions, the Dwayne Johnson's production company. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're kind of in limbo there, but
it'd be a great fit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if somebody gets it and knows the place to put it, but it's just it's part of my ridiculous plan, I guess. But I had seen that he was going to do he was going to appear at the Stanley Comic-Con, and so my thought was, well, I'll just get some books in his hand. How hard could that be, And we can, maybe have a 30-second conversation as I sort of awkwardly shove a packet of books into his chest as he walks by, and then maybe, we can go from there. So this also happens to be on the day of my wedding anniversary. So, and also maybe a few days before my wife is having major surgery. So it's my wife's a saint. She puts up with a lot of crap.
A supportive wife can make a huge difference.
She does. So I booked the flight. She's cool with it. We're going to try this and whatever. And then I start calling my wrestling friends. And I'm friends with a ton of people in wrestling. And I figure somebody's got, a way to get to The Rock. I'm friends with Ric Flair, Jerry Lawler, Mick Foley, whatever. So I'm calling all these people and they're like, no, you don't understand. Like, he's not that guy anymore. Like, he's on a whole nother level. Like, so now I'm like, shit, I booked this flight, anniversary. Like, I got to come away with something. And obviously The Rock's got he's very aggressive on social media and has a very specific brand. So I basically wrote a small thing about, started from the bottom, now we're here kind of thing. And put it on Twitter, and a lot of my wrestling friends retweeted it, and eventually it made it across his viewpoint or whatever. And his team contacted me and allowed me to submit him some stuff. And I guess now I was going to do just hand him some books, and now I have to make a formal pitch to a major production company. So that's a very different animal as well. So I was working on that while I was, on the plane to Los Angeles and all of this. And like we went to an appointment at the hospital for a surgery. Then she dropped me at the airport. I flew to Los Angeles. I flew back. I worked on my pitch. I went to work that night. But we got it. I got it in time. We've exchanged a few emails. So I feel like if they were going to say no, they would have said no by now, but I don't know. I never know how Hollywood works. So I'm got all my fingers crossed for it, and But it's nerve-wracking, too, to just know it's out there, you know?
It is, but exciting too. I mean, and all you can do is make and take every chance that you can, right?
No, and I mean, I guess sometimes I'm too dumb to know what questions I shouldn't ask. And I mean, that works in my favor too, you know? Be like, hey, Ric Flair, you want to draw, you want to write a story for my comic book? And he's like, sure, kid, you know, and there you go. So
yeah, the worst thing they could say is no. And
right.
you know, as you recounted, I mean, you've had that experience. I mean, do you feel
Sure.
like that kind of like once you've had that rejection, you kind of, maybe you don't fear it quite as much?
Listen,
Maybe
man,
numbs you over.
Look at his face. I've dealt with rejection for a long time.
So, if you could take me into your convention experience a little bit. So, there are wrestling shows you go to, and then also comic book conventions, correct? Mm-hmm. So, I assume it's an easier sell at a wrestling show.
No,
not so
really.
much.
There's a certain fan, because there's certain wrestling fans that just want their belt signed. You know, there's Star, you know.
Gotcha.
And then there's people that sort of, so we were saying before, like, you know, WWE is wrestling to a lot of people and superheroes is comic books to a lot of people. So, you know, you got to find fans that are open to the independent sort of thing for both of them. So there's some people that just don't consider anything but WWE as wrestling, and same. So if I go to a wrestling show, I got to find those people who like comics. But there's always people that are willing to try it. So like the thing that I'm probably the most proud of is that I am a ton of people's first comic books, and I would wager more than most creators, because I'm out in a different area, sort of, you know, like a missionary out in the wild, like recruiting people. And I've gotten a ton of people into comics just through Headlocked, where they read Headlocked and they started reading other stuff. And
Oh, the irony of being rejected by the publishers and the comic shops.
I hear you. And now I'm carrying their water.
It's funny though, because so with my podcast, the last season I traveled to comic book stores around the country and talked to retailers, and one of the things we talked about is, you know, where are the opportunities for growth, and we talked about creating new comic book readers, and it's like, well, how do you do that? You've been doing that.
Well, I think one of the things that's tricky is, like, if you read Walking Dead or you see it on TV and you want to read the comics, like if you come to a comic book store, a lot of times you're either going to find it with other image books or books that begin with a W. Like, comic books is one of the few forms of media that isn't sorted by genre. So I think, you know, like if you dig Walking Dead, maybe like Arcana books or Avatar, or whatever, you know what I mean? Like other horror books. And that's a thing. It's tricky, you know what I mean? Like, that's a lot of work, and it's different from week to week based on what's put out there. So I do think sometimes that makes it hard for people to necessarily find what they're looking for. And I also think that a lot of times people that are fans of both of these things aren't necessarily the most, like, I don't like to ask for things at stores, and it drives my wife nuts. But, you know, like, if I want to buy a video game, like, I'll go to GameStop because I can take it off the thing and go to the counter, but I'm not going to go to Walmart because I'm not asking somebody to open that case. Like, I just don't care. You know what I mean? And there's people that are like that, you know? So, I mean, I feel like, you know, the easier you can make it for people, the more you'll see from a return, I guess.
Right.
It's tricky, you know? You got that one shot to get somebody that's coming out on a curiosity thing. You got to hook them on something.
Well, so in terms of hooking people at the shows in particular, so what goes into, like, what sort of display? I mean, you have a display set up here. I mean, is that more or less what you, maybe a smaller version of what you have at your shows?
I recently just upgraded my display for New York Comic Con. I have like these 9-foot banners now,
wow.
And they're pretty jacked up. Like, I feel like I like them a lot. It's a pain carrying them around, but they're also 9 feet tall. So, like, some places, you know, some wrestling shows aren't even in places with 9-foot ceilings. I take what I need, I guess. If there's, you know, 100 fans or 200 fans, maybe it's a smaller display. If it's, you know, Comic Cons and stuff, I try to bring something bigger. I usually have wrestlers that come with me. It's more of a partnership. Like, I don't try to get into, like, taking money from people or whatever. I'm just like, hey, look, I got this space here. There's going to be 100,000 fans. You want to come make some money? You come make some money.
Right.
So people say the most amazing thing that I've ever done and ever was getting Ric Flair to come to my booth 4 times and not giving him any money and not paying for his flights. So I feel like I've accomplished something, I guess, in the wrestling world.
And so when you're, when people are coming up to your booth, I mean, what's the pitch? I mean, how do you go about selling them on Headlocked?
I mean, I just tell them a little bit about the story. I kind of let people just do their own thing. If I've got if I've got somebody with me, a lot of times, they're coming to meet Jerry, and then Jerry will be, talking to them, and they'll be a little starstruck, and you got to give them a little time, and then be like, hey, look at this, or Jerry will be like, I did the cover for these, and that helps a little bit. Everybody connects in a different way. I mean, I try to be a resource for people that are trying to break in, and I try to be open about that. So sometimes people find me for that. I don't try to sell. Like, if people want to buy it, they want to buy it. Like, I don't, I've been a comic book fan forever. I've been to comic book shows. Like, I don't like that hard pitch where you're like, and it's $30, and then it just kind of hangs there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if you want to buy it, you want to buy it, and that's cool. Like, I don't ever want somebody to feel pressured into checking out my stuff. If it's something they think they'll dig on, then that's cool,
Right.
I mean, I don't want to be that guy.
In terms of goals at these shows, I mean, I'm assuming big picture, you want to raise the awareness of the book, turn people onto it, but then more immediately, I mean, you do have overhead with these shows, right? You're paying to rent the space, the booth space, your travel costs. I mean, how do you handle that?
You do a couple different things. I mean, usually that's not a problem. Usually, I can make enough to cover. But we'll do like limited edition prints. Like, so for New York Comic Con this year, I had Christian, Dallas Page, Lita, and Tommy Dreamer, and we did an old Fantastic Four cover homage, and then they'll sign it and whatever, and we sell those. That type of thing. Usually, though, honestly, I'm at a point now where I can kind of just do my own thing, and I'm friends with a lot of wrestlers, so like we'll do art prints and they sign them for me. AJ Styles and Joe and Finn Balor or whatever, like they'll just sign stuff for me because we're friends, and I collaborate with them on stuff, and they don't care because they're getting those fat WWE checks. So, I mean, I've been really, really fortunate. And I think the one thing that's the other main thing, I guess, other than finding your audience is partner with people. You know what I mean? Everything takes a community. Like, in as much as, the stories about me out in the road or whatever, like, I wouldn't be anywhere without the people that have helped me. The wrestlers have helped me. I just started producing mini comics for WrestleCrate, and it's the type of a thing where, I make these mini comics where I collaborate with different wrestlers, and then we produce them and we put them in their crate, and they've got 1,000, 1,500 subscribers, and that allows me to sort of finance the production of more material. They've got something to put in their crate, and then, the name guys that work with them, I get them, some of my friends can collaborate or can be a part of their thing too, and they can make a little bit of money. It's the kind of, if you do business where everybody wins, I feel like that's the right way to do business. That's the way we try to do business, and you can find a way where everybody can help each other. But just have some sort of value. There's too many times where, people come to me and they're like, oh, I want to break into the business. And I'm at a table and I don't mind helping people, but they just dump their stuff all over your stuff. And they'll be like, oh, this is, my picture of Batman fighting a velociraptor and whatever. And it's fine. You know what I mean? But like, some people are very, very oblivious of anybody else's needs other than their own. So I try to be a part of the community of guys. I think I've backed 120 Kickstarters. I buy indie books when I go to cons. I do San Diego every year, and we're in the little independent section. And, when I see new people, I always try to go up and buy something from them just so they have that kind of an experience. Just, hey, we sold something, because it's nerve-wracking to be on that side of the booth and everybody's walking by. And, I've had some rough shows too, So in terms of part of when you were asking about my goals,
Right.
One of the goals I've set for myself is to try to create a positive moment outside of the show. So my third show I ever did was at the Toronto Fan Expo at the Toronto. It was the third biggest Comic-Con at the time, and I'm like, oh, Toronto's a huge wrestling city. We're going to do great. It's going to be awesome. And I'm in the Artist Alley section, and on this side of the Artist Alley, there are satanic priests because they have a horror section. And then on this side of the horror section, there is a carnival, like a freak show carnival, and there's like a very aggressive dude who's like trying to get people to come in. So about, an hour into the show, everybody kind of figures out they just walk all the way around. So we got no traffic. We're not really selling much. And then I get sick at dinner that night, and I left my bag with my cash box at the restaurant. It got broken into. I had all my cash taken. And then as I was leaving, I had a long box on a hand cart, and I was going up an escalator, and the box collapsed, and all my books went down a packed escalator full of people. Like it was my third show. Like I was ready to be done. Like it was tough.
I mean, I would imagine that's a hard one to get.
It was,
back up from.
and it wasn't a cheap show to do. So that was a real disheartening day. So I sort of made a pact to make sure that I create some sort of a positive memory, whether it's visiting something in a city that I'm in, or for anybody that's ever followed my Instagram, I eat a lot of food. So I try to find like a good jacked up food place or something that's really good to sort of tie it around. So if the event doesn't go bad, at least I get some. I can raise my blood sugar level a little bit.
At these conventions, specifically the comic book ones, I mean, what do you find are the biggest preconceptions and misconceptions that you have to combat with respect to either wrestling generally or headlock specifically?
I think people always think a lot of times people don't understand like how difficult of a business the comics is. And I don't think I did either. You know what I mean? Like, one of my friends always makes a joke. He's like, "Oh, when are you going to get that Spider-Man money?" And I really don't think that that's a thing that exists, And I think it's different if you're in like WWE, I think. But I mean, I don't think anybody's getting like super, super rich either way. You know what I mean? Like, I think you do it out of love. You do it out of passion. I know all kinds of people that I feel like they want to get into it to be famous or to be rich or whatever. And that's the wrong reason to. It sounds whatever. It sounds trite, but it's the wrong reason to do anything. I mean, when I've worked, my usual convention weekend, like I work Sunday through Thursday. I leave work at 4 a.m. on a Thursday. I drive directly to the airport. I fly to a show. I take a taxi to the show and set up. Do the first day on no sleep. Then I do the other 2 days. I fly home, and then I land, and then I go to work. I come home quick, shower, go to work. I mean, you gotta love what you're doing. You gotta have some sort of passion to sustain that. Otherwise, it just becomes an unbearable slog.
Yeah. And I would imagine, again, attracting the interest of professional wrestlers, developing your fan base helps fuel that passion, right? When you see that what you're doing is resonating with people.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, I've had some really cool stuff happen for a guy that manages a warehouse in upstate New York and writes an independent comic that a lot of people haven't heard of. I mean, I got invited to WrestleMania 2 years ago as a guest of 2K Sports. I sat in a luxury box. Like, that was pretty cool. I've been to Hollywood parties and stuff and hung out with famous people, and I don't know, it's all that stuff's pretty neat. It's a nice little side perk of having famous friends, I guess. But I've had a lot of really cool stuff happen. If it all ended tomorrow, like it's been a good ride,
I'm sure those famous friends, it helped a lot with the crowdfunding, right? Because I had my own recent crowdfunding experience, and it was successful, but it was a beast. And I would imagine having people in your corner like that who can get the word out must be a huge help.
Well, so what we do is the books I sell at shows, at conventions, or whatever, they're 5 chapters of Headlocked. The books that people get through Kickstarter have supplemental content created by famous wrestlers. So the last book, the book that we're currently producing, Ric Flair, Mick Foley, Cody Rhodes, and Kenny Omega have stories in, and that's sort of, we try to reward the people who help us the way we need it the most. So the Kickstarter books are super, super jacked up to like 40 extra pages, and it's all really cool content. Ed McGuinness is doing a pinup for it. Andy Bollinger, who else? Rafael Albuquerque, Robbie Rodriguez. Like it's a real murderer's row, because I mean so many people love wrestling and they want to just they want to be a part of it. So it's been really, really cool.
Right. In recent years, we've seen things like the movie The Wrestler and even more recently Glow on Netflix. I mean, when you see things like that being successful, resonating with people, how do you feel? Is there a sense of vindication? Like, yeah, there is an audience for this and people want this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's nice. I think the one thing that the internet has done for everyone, I think, is made your sort of secret geek thing cool. And you sort of realize now that everybody likes that stuff. And you're like, oh man, I just learned Terry Crews was an artist, you know what I mean? Like, and a good one, you know what I mean? Like, everybody's got their little weird thing, and I don't know. Like, I think it's made it more socially acceptable now for people to get their old geek flags out, and I think that's allowed for the explosion of these types of things and these types of shows where, for years, like I would go to San Diego and Hollywood people would come by and they'd look at your stuff and be like, oh, this is really cool, They're like, too bad they already made the wrestling movie. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm sure they felt that way when Goodfellas was made. They were like, oh, they already made the Mafia movie, right? But that's the mentality that you have to fight against. And it does seem like that's loosening up a lot. So, as I think everything sort of descends into more niche interests and whatnot.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I said before about feeling that comic book stigma, when I was growing up. And I definitely don't feel that as much now. So it's nice to see that, and hopefully, with the wrestling stigma, it's moving away from that as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's definitely a case.
So I gave just a very brief synopsis of Headlocked at the beginning, but would you mind telling the audience a little bit more about what Headlocked is about?
So it's about a kid who's a theater major in college, and he sort of unexpectedly falls in love with wrestling, and he kind of gets the wrestling bug. He quits school, and it's sort of his journey through the wrestling business, starting on like day 0. So we tried to make it accessible for everybody. Like, all you really have to know is it's oiled up hairless men pretending to hit each other, and you can follow the story. Like, I try to, so he's starting from day 1. He's got to find his school, and like he's learning to run the ropes. And the thing that I like the best is that all the art in the book now is done by professional wrestlers. So my new artist, or the newer artist, the artist on the book for the last 3 is his name is Mikel Molapola. He's a Samoan wrestler from New Zealand. He was a tag champ with Haku for people who know wrestling. But he does the art now, so he's an amazing artist. We also collaborated on a story with Samoa Joe for the Boom comic that it's actually out this week. He brings sort of a different, he understands everything, like with hand placement and stuff, and like where things, how things should happen. And one of the things that's always funny is when wrestlers look at my stuff, they're like, who taught your artist how to draw a proper bump or how to run the ropes properly? And, so it's all like, it's super, super authentic. And I like the idea of, a kid learning the art of professional wrestling, and all the art is done by wrestlers. Jill Thompson does our credits pages, and she's kind of got like a toe in the wrestling business. She designed a lot of gear for guys and stuff. So, but she's the only sort of non-wrestler that's part of it now.
Yeah, do you have wrestling experience yourself?
So this is a ridiculous story, but when I decided I was going to write the book, I was like, I should probably get a feel for this. So on the message boards, when I started, sort of kicking out the ideas, some guy reaches out to me, goes, hey, I live down in Newport News, Virginia, and me and a couple of the guys were big comic book fans, and we really like what you're doing, and we'd really like to see it done right, so we kind of want you to get a feel for it. And I was like, okay. And they're like, so we want you to come down and work out in our ring. Sure. So I drove to Virginia to work out in a wrestling ring with 3 people I'd never met in my life. I mean, that could have gone really badly. And it didn't, you know what I mean? I didn't even think anything of it. Like, I was just, like, now I'm like, man, what a dope. Like, they could have been like organ salesmen or something, or, I mean, back in the day, like that type of thing. I mean, I don't know if everybody remembers like John Stossel and David Schultz. Like, he got his ass beat on 2020 for asking if wrestling was fake. I mean, guys used to have to protect the business in that way, and so if I tried doing this maybe 30 years ago, I probably would have gotten the snot pounded out of me. But they were all super cool, and it was cool to get a feel for it. I mean, I played football for 15 years, and I didn't really get hurt that much, but I did that stuff for 2 days, and I couldn't turn my head to the left for like a week. So, I mean, it's definitely a grind, and it's grueling, and it's just like anything else. Like, you're sort of teaching your body to ignore its natural defense mechanisms, and then sort of just absorbing that pain. And I think that that's fascinating. Like, what these guys give for their art, and, to have that art sort of ridiculed to a certain extent, and these guys are, cutting their foreheads open, or, some of the deathmatch guys will, go through like, panes of glass and stuff. And it's, I think that's amazing for people to have that sort of desire to give that of themselves.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the book has a lot of insight and a lot of heart. I mean, I really enjoyed it. For people who want to pick it up themselves, well, I know you have them here, but generally speaking, where can people get your stuff? Where can people follow you?
All my social media is Headlocked Comic. It's one word, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that. It's all run by me. Like I said, for people that are interested in breaking in or whatever into the business or want help with that, I mean, in as much as I can help or give advice, I'm always open to people that are interested in that kind of stuff. Yeah, you can get my books online or at shows. Once we're done with this, the book we're working on now, we'll have another Kickstarter. I got a couple other things. I just did 2 stories for Boom. I did one for the Royal Rumble special with AJ Styles, and then one with Samoa Joe. Probably going to do more with them. I'll be working on a licensed thing with some Mexican wrestlers later in the summer probably. So it's really cool to kind of start to get a little bit of appreciation for all the effort that we've put into it. Like, where people are like, oh, I'd like to see you do other stuff. So it's kind of neat too. But I mean, Headlock's always my baby.
If some of the publishers or one of the publishers who turned you down came back to you now and they're like, hey, we hear The Rock smells what you're cooking. We want your book now.
Well, it's kind of funny
what would you say?
because the person that works for the publisher that laughed in my face does not work there anymore. But they did publish a wrestling comic book that was very it wasn't like mine, but the press release made it sound very, very similar to Headlocked. So, but it's fine. They're like, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, I think everything happened the way it had to happen. Like, I mean, I feel like, if somebody had picked me up back in 2009 or whatever, like, it would have been in stores, it would have been out of stores. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the lessons that I learned and the stuff that I went through ended up making me make it a stronger book. So, we went through, like, I went through, there were times where I asked people, I was sort of forced to ask people that I didn't know or I didn't have relationships with for help and whatever. And, I was sort of forced to do that because of, you hit a wall or whatever, like, oh, hey, and that's how I built a connection with Ric Flair, which is cool. You know what I mean? Like, it's cool to know a dude like that. But you know what I mean? Sometimes, like, all those obstacles take you out of your comfort zone, and then they force you to either, adapt or die, so to speak. And so I guess to a certain extent, I guess I'm glad everything happened the way it happened, or I probably wouldn't be sitting here now. I would have had a book that went 5 issues, and that would be it.
No, everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
So sometimes that reason's random chance. Other times there's true meaning behind it,
Right. So, I mean, it's just about handling adversity the best way you can and whatnot. But yeah, it's been a crazy ride.
Yeah. No, like I said, I said it on and off mic, but I'm very inspired by what you've built.
Thanks. And that's something to consider though too when you want to do your own thing. Like, I mean, I would wager that a good chunk of you have no idea who I was and you walked in the room today. And that's how hard I work to be unknown. So, you know what I mean? Like, if you're really going to go for it, you know what I mean? Like, you kind of got to work as hard as the next guy, or else what's the point?
I think that's been a bit of a theme here today, whether it was Cliff giving up a sure thing as an editor to take a chance at being a freelance artist, or the hustling that you've done, really taking those chances and having that passion and seeing it through. So again, kudos to you for everything you've accomplished. For anyone out there who's looking to do the same, go for it. It's really been my pleasure to moderate these conversations. If you want to hear me talk to more people, my comic shop history is available on iTunes. And thank you to Michael and Alex and Mark and Franco. Thank you all. Thanks for listening. Premiere Week concludes tomorrow, Friday, April 6th, with a book club discussion of Batman White Knight recorded live at Zap Comic Con. Don't be a flat squirrel.